Welcome back. I hope you have enjoyed the session so far. So this panel is going to be about recycling, the challenges and opportunities. And as we have said before, with Ambassador Peter Thompson highlighting the need to tackle ocean pollution, and he mentioned something that's very powerful, which is the source-to-sea approach, which is something that's increasingly prevalent kind of in the ocean economy, because most of those kind of ocean health issues actually don't really originate in the ocean. They originate on land, they originate in cities, because of lack of recycling systems, or dysfunctional waste management systems, as well as agricultural runoff and so on. So this session is going to be about recycling and the latest advances there, looking at mechanical and chemical recycling, but also ways of how the waste management system generally can work, the opportunities and potential for recycling to kind of minimize the marine plastic pollution that we're all concerned about. You can find out more details about the work that we do in ocean health at impact.economist.com/ocean, where we have lots of content on plastic, the circular economy and so on. So I'm very excited to have a panel here with me looking at this issue of recycling. I'd like to invite the panelists to join me on stage. So first of all, we have Ignacio Gavilan. He's Environmental Sustainability Director at the Consumer Goods Forum. Please join me. Mike Stockman, he's Head of Plastic IQ at Delterra. We have Laszlo Szekely, he is Vice President and Head of Circular Plastic Applications at Tomra. And last but not least, Agathe Grossmith, she's CSR Project Director at Carrefour. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much. In terms of this topic, there's a lot of different dimensions we could look at in terms of recycling and the progress we've seen. The idea is to first look at, where are we with the circular economy for plastics? And then looking at some of these kind of recent advances that we are seeing in mechanical and chemical recycling, but also looking at the collaborations and partnerships that we need to create. And obviously we are here from different organizations because we are all eager to collaborate, and what kind of partnerships can work to really accelerate recycling. And then finally, what does system change look like? Because we have heard that these kind of buzzwords, system change, but what would that really mean? What would that look like in the plastic space? So starting with the progress that we've recently seen in the circular economy. And please, also, there will be opportunities for questions and answers. If you have any questions, midway through, we'll have the opportunity to answer those questions. And also on the slide, there will be an opportunity to send in questions. So in terms of the recent progress that we've seen to build a circular economy for plastics, so Ignacio, I wanted to start with you. Moving towards a circular economy for plastics obviously is a journey. It's not something you can achieve from one day to the next. So what kind of commitments have companies made recently towards achieving this future?
Good. So I think the word to describe progress is slow. Just for context, the Consumer Goods Forum basically brings together a number of retailers and manufacturers from around the world. So think about your Walmarts, your Tesco's, your Jerónimo Martins here in Portugal. And from the manufacturing side will be the Nestle, Unilever, Kellogg's, or Mondelez, right? So they both, retailers and manufacturers, have created individual commitments themselves, and then what we do with them is create collective commitments. So there's a number of things we've done. Obviously, we were coming from a very linear economy, so there was comfort set on that economy. We're moving to a more unconventional, circular, break-in, complacency, and convenience economy, right? So it's a big step for many of these companies. We've basically done three main things for them. One is the fundamental redesign of plastic packaging. You can check, there are 9 golden design rules that basically teach you how to redesign your packaging. Anything you will find in a supermarket, from flexibles to rigids, HDPE, PET, polypropylene, polystyrene. There's a way to reduce plastic, which is very important. We're going to talk about recycling today, but there's a need for reduction at origin. Virgin material needs to be reduced. Second one is EPR. We don't have a direct influence on it. It's mixed with others, but we can persuade, we can advocate, and we believe optimal EPR with shared financial responsibility is something that will somehow solve the problems of collection, sorting, and recycling. And the third element we've developed with our members is recycling, particularly chemical recycling, and the complementarity with mechanical.
Okay, great. I mean, those steps are, in a way, kind of a good guidance, because obviously starting with that, with that need to kind of reduce, as you said, but also having, that approach on plastic packaging, because that is one of the biggest issues, right, in terms of percentage of unrecycled plastics. But then the optimal EPR and extended producer responsibility, I think most people in the room will know that. And of course, looking at recycling, chemical recycling. Obviously, we did a study a couple of years ago on chemical recycling. There's so many opportunities, but also risks in that. But it's really good to go into that space.
I'm sure we'll get into the detail. I forgot one is reuse refill. I'm sure Agathe from Carrefour will have far better examples than me, but it's another good opportunity to reduce in origin.
Definitely.
And another thing we're doing is actively engaging with the plastic treaty, the UN plastic treaty, because we think a good treaty with full life cycle included and some binding targets will be a great way to level the playing field, which right now it's a bit uneven.
And it's absolutely vital to have industry involved in that process. Mike, as well, in terms of Delterra, you're an environmental non-profit that works across the circular economy, looking at the whole value chain, upstream, designing waste out of the system. We mentioned that recycling is not necessarily the go-to always. Actually, that design stage is important, but you also work downstream to kind of capture recyclable materials. So, to what extent has there recently been progress, or maybe not progress, depending on what you're going to say, on building this kind of circular economy for plastics?
Sure. Thanks for the question and for the invitation. Happy to be here. To go back to something that Ignacio said, we think that the progress has been quite slow. I think that there was a report out late last year by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, New Plastics Economy, saying that the majority of the 1,000 companies that signed up to their global commitments will not meet their targets by 2025. And in fact, companies have increased the use of plastics across their portfolios. And we know that based on some work that was done by Systemic and Pew in Breaking the Plastic Wave a few years ago, that the amount of plastic is going to triple by 2050. And we're currently leaking around 11 million metric tons of plastic into the oceans on an annual basis. So the progress is obviously quite slow, and there are a lot of challenges. I think if we think about recycling, specifically, it is certainly a tool and a potentially impactful tool in the toolbox. But as you mentioned, and as Ignacio mentioned as well, we need to start to look upstream as well. Start to look at redesigning plastics to be more recyclable. We think about 20% of the material that is currently produced and consumed is mechanically recyclable, right? And of that 20%, probably a small fraction of it is actually collected and then recycled. So we're talking about upwards of 80% of material that is then leaked into the environment, leaked into the oceans, et cetera. So we need to think about redesigning plastics for recyclability, standardizing plastics. It's almost impossible to mechanically recycle a piece of plastic that has multiple types of plastics in it, is covered in PVC labeling, or is flexible in nature. It has to have some rigidity to it to put it through a recycling line. And then we need to think about actually putting circularity in practice. It's not just about redesigning the packaging for recycling and promoting recycling, sorting, processing, et cetera, but then it's encouraging companies to include more post-consumer recycled material into the feedstock that they use, so that we can actually promote this idea of circularity in practice.
Yeah, great points. I mean, there's been progress on that post-consumer recycled input, because you have, like, for example, in California, I think there's new legislation around that, and really these kind of targets, which then, put, that regulatory push as well to make that more of a reality. So that's a great point on redesigning, as you mentioned as well, is the kind of a solution that is focusing on the upstream of the value chain. Laszlo, as well, in terms of looking at Tomra, I mean, you focus on collection and reverse vending. So, what is your take on our progress so far? Is it do you share this notion that progress has been slow in terms of getting to a circular economy, and are we getting there, and what's holding us back?
Yeah. Thank you for the invitation, first of all. We are concentrating not just on the reverse vending machines or the taking back the packaging or the beverages, but also the sorting of the waste and different kind of waste streams. I'm fully agreed the process is extremely slow, but there is a process, to be honest. When I stepped in this industry around 12 years ago, it was completely different. So at that time, it was impossible to sit down with brand owners, packaging designers, packaging manufacturers and petrochemical companies and discussed about closing the loop. So it was like a fairy tale if you got somebody on the phone. Meanwhile, this is happening, I would say, almost weekly. So we are doing a lot of workshops related to design for recycling. So basically the packaging designer, the packaging producer is coming to us with a brand owner. Sometimes also the retailer said, okay, we would like to change the design of the packaging and do it more recyclable, more environmental friendly. It's always the same question. The first question, is this packaging recyclable? And my answer is always, yeah, to say that something is recyclable, it's not enough to say it's detectable or not. So it has to fulfill 4 points. So it has to be collected, it has to be sorted, detectable and sortable. It has to be recyclable at the end, not just detectable. And it has to have a market. So it doesn't make sense to recycle something which I cannot sell again. So bring it back to the loop. Yeah. And in best case, it's not in open loop recycling, it's more in the closed loop recycling. Yeah. So I think there is a movement in the industry, but it takes some time because we are coming from different worlds. And to be honest, 10 years ago, the petrochemical companies saw the recycling industry as a competitor. Meanwhile, this is changing completely. So you see also that the petrochemical companies are investing in recycling because they see an opportunity. Fully agreed, recycling should not be the target. We should check if we can reduce and reuse. But if we cannot reduce and reuse in some cases, we saw in the pandemic that it was so much plastic on the market, then we should recycle this material. So I would say plastic is not really the issue. How we handle the plastic is the issue. And if we manage to produce products which are easy recyclable, and I say easy recyclable, then we can solve at least one issue.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you highlight that actually that recycling stage is only one, in this kind of, you mentioned, collection, sorting, recycling, and then creating that market. And that's actually so important because ultimately, we want to create value, and the plastics has value, and if it's seen as, it has a market, then it's more likely to then create that loop that you mentioned. Exactly. Agathe, as well, in terms of the retailer perspective, of course, at Carrefour, you're responsible for delivering sustainable solutions in store, as well as also building partnerships and projects with various actors in the whole value chain for plastics. So in your view, where, are we actually getting closer to creating this kind of circular economy for plastics?
Well, there has been some progress made. I think the first progress that was achieved was to have a global vision. I think you mentioned the Ellen MacArthur global commitment. It was a shift when it started being adopted by Carrefour, other companies, and by then states. We had a big alignment on the vision that we need to reduce plastic and we need to make it recyclable and recycled. This is a bit unique in the field of sustainability. There are not that many topics that reach such a big consensus between companies, state representative or administration, NGOs, and consumers. Consumers are also, I think, very aware of plastic. We are very aware of plastic. We don't like to see plastic in the environment, and we don't like to go shop in a store that is full of plastic and come back at home and have all this. So at least this is a positive step. I want to bounce on it because we have that we don't have in other domains sometimes. But it is true that we still need to make a very visible change. And I would like to restate what is recycling in our business. Indeed, recycling is only at the end. We've been recently trying to assess where we have impact in our various countries where we operate, depending on the facilities that are in place for recycling. Well, we have an impact whether the system is good or not, which is terrible. Means the first action we need to take is to reduce. This is the best and the most efficient way to reduce our impact. Obviously, we know that. You've been listening to reduce, reuse, recycle for a while, but it is very material. And the other reason why it is very material is because it's changing our habits as consumers, or as companies. And this is why we are trying to make this very visible in stores. I'll give a few examples. When you go in a Carrefour store, if you go to the fruit and vegetable section, in the past you would have a massive amount of plastic. We completely shifted this area of our stores. We started with organic products. Consumers were very unhappy to have organic products all wrapped in plastic. And they were right. So we had this for technical reasons, organization reasons. We thought it was the best way to segregate those products. We found other solutions. We did. And then we roll it out for all the fruit and vegetable section. And now it is visible, so there's a change coming. And this is this kind of mindset that we need to achieve on many topics. Circularity will also be reached by reusing. So we can reuse now by starting again deposit systems. And we've been implementing a Loop initiative with our partner Loop to put in place, because in some countries it was in place a long time ago, put in place deposit system for packaging, for food, and for various brands, for the typical purchasing basket a client will use in his everyday life. And now it's being rolled out in 40 stores in Carrefour. We have a target to reach 500 stores in 2025. And we tested in various formats, whether convenience stores, hypermarkets, supermarkets. So we are starting this process. And I also want to bounce on a bulk system. We do think bulk system will also be a good way to implement a strong, reusable solution.
Yeah.
But right now, it's not easy. You go in a Carrefour store, use the bulk system. It's not easy to use. I don't know how many of you use those systems, but you have to be committed.
Yeah.
The product don't fall very easily. If you come with your continent, you have to wait it several times. It's a bit tough. So we are testing new solutions to make it a lot easier for consumers, and we believe that this type of business will be bigger in our stores and bigger in our portfolio in the coming years.
And you mentioned something that's very powerful, which is that consumer centrism, because it's just expecting consumers to do things because they know it's a good thing to do. It's actually you're making it easier, as you said, deposit systems, but also your focus on reducing, so that you don't put all the onus on the consumer to do all of that. So you're helping with that. That's great to see. And you mentioned at the start the consensus that is emerging, and that is already a really good starting point. So when industry, policy, consumers are basing on the same kind of agreement when it comes to what we need to do, but still progress has been slow. So just focusing on that recycling bit, because you mentioned reduction and it's very important, redesigning. But what, as a retailer, when it comes to kind of priorities in terms of increasing recycling rates, what is your take on the latest progress and developments in mechanical and chemical recycling?
Well, I'll mention a few of the issues we struggle with recycling. When we decide to have 100% of our products recyclable, of our packaging recyclable by 2025, we first had to understand what is actually recyclable. And it is not easy. You can think that because this bottle is in PET, it will be recycled, and then maybe this other product being, pot of yogurt, for instance, being in PET will be recycled as well. Well, it's not as easy. We have experts here, but we have to match every type of product, every layer of packaging with their material to finally find out whether it will be sorted by the consumers. Is there a system to collect it? And then will it be finally recycled by a plant that it will accept it, because maybe it's not too small, it's not too big, it will be really captured. And this takes a lot of time. It took us 2 years to set up with our fellow retailers in France, for instance, a system that will track every type of combination and share it with an IT tool with our suppliers. Same for everybody, saying, okay, these are the rules. Can you help us report on that and specify every type of packaging you're using? And this is how now we are able to capture how much of our packaging are recyclable. But that was not easy, and making sure there is a solution at scale to take care of the packaging we are using.
Yeah, that's a really good point of actually knowing what's recyclable. That's the starting point, and only then you can actually do something about it. So that kind of data collection is absolutely vital, and it takes time, as you said. But at least making progress on it is happening. That's brilliant. Laszlo, as well, in terms of the need for comprehensive waste collection, something that you have mentioned, that is at the heart of what you do at TOMRA. So in your view, to what extent has there recently been progress on kind of these kind of mechanical and chemical recycling technologies?
Yeah, coming back to the packaging, so in my opinion, or generally, the role of the packaging should be to protect the product. So everything over designing should be simplified, and the industry is working on that. And of course, if we manage with the packaging designers and developers to reduce or to simplify the packaging, that we can sort out this packaging and recycle it on the mechanical way, and in best case bring it back in the same application, that would be phenomenal. In case of polyolefins, it's a little bit difficult when it comes to food application. We know exactly from the PET bottles, for example, which we collect separately via DRS system, that the majority or a part of it is going back in the same product. So this is possible, this is working since decades, so no rocket science. What we should do is to work on other applications like PS and other PET trays, because then we can close the loop. Of course, in some of the cases, when we realize that the packaging has to be, I don't know, a multi-layer, multi-material, then it's getting more complicated, because in that case you cannot recycle it on a mechanical way. And then we have to check if the chemical way it's the right way. Sometimes it's not even a chemical way, and then the only solution is to dispose it, which is terrible. For that reason, the mechanical recycling has some limitation, and the chemical recycling as well. So it's a misunderstanding that some of the audience or people think that chemical recycling is like a silver bullet, that everything which is not mechanically recyclable, we just put it in a reactor and new plastic is coming out. That's not how it works. And yeah, it's a long way to go. So it's until we have simplified packaging and easy to recycle. And even if you have to choose, in our opinion, we say that it is better to recycle mechanically, because it has a smaller footprint. The technology exists, and it's more environmentally friendly.
Yeah, great points. I mean, also we actually did this study 2 years ago on chemical and mechanical recycling technologies. We rated them by things like how scalable are these solutions, how investable are they, and how sustainable are they. And they're, as you said, they're not necessarily silver bullets. They're great innovations, and they can actually really return those kind of plastic pellets back into the system, but they can be expensive, they might not be scalable, there might be issues around the heat that is used and all these kind of things. So it's definitely not necessarily a silver bullet, but it's important to still look into those innovations. So what you mentioned in terms of simplifying products, looking at how to deal with multi-layered products is absolutely vital. Mike, as well, in terms of, you look into this as well, in terms of what are the latest mechanical and chemical recycling technologies that you have come across that you think have kind of promise, and what are their potential and what are their limitations?
I mean, I think we understand the challenges with mechanical recycling. I think we've talked about it quite a bit here in terms of, there are not that many materials that can go into the mechanical recycling process. And then recycling in and of itself is an extraordinarily difficult game to create viable unit economics around. You have to pay for collection, you have to pay for sorting, you have to pay for processing. It's an extraordinarily high volume, low margin game. And so you have to be very selective in the materials that you you put into that, because there needs to be a viable commodity that comes out the outside, and then there needs to be a market for that. So there's a fairly well-established market for rPET. There's a fairly well-established market for recycled HDPE, and then the rest of the plastics, in terms of post-consumer recyclate that can go into new products, it's very, very minimal. I just want to talk a little bit about what we do at Delterra to sort of address some of these challenges. So Delterra is a nonprofit that was born out of McKinsey a few years ago, and our mission is to design systems to improve, to redesign human systems to improve the planet and and people in the planet. And we do this, we picked waste and waste management as our first sort of initiative to look at. And as we said earlier, we sort of try and take a systems approach. So we run 2 initiatives, both in the Global South, in Indonesia, Argentina, and soon to be Brazil. So we've talked a lot about redesigning packaging to be more recycling. We run an initiative called Plastic IQ that helps companies better understand the environmental and economic impact of their current packaging portfolio, and then to create strategies to improve that impact over time. So we can tell you that if you're a SME operating in Indonesia and you produce 1,000 PET bottles a year, based on the waste management systems in Indonesia, where those 1,000 bottles go. So 700 of them end up in landfill, 200 of them end up in the ocean, maybe 50 of them are recycled into new bottles. So you can really get a very good idea of the environmental impact of your plastics portfolio in a specific context. You can also then get a very good idea of the economic impact of your plastics packaging portfolio. What will happen over the course of the next 10 years to your costs based on EPR fees, based on a potential plastics treaty, and then based on some of the decisions that you make. If you stay at 100% virgin for your PET portfolio, how much is that going to cost you over the next 10 years? If you redesign and say, okay, I want to put 40% rPET into it, how much is that going to cost you? You can, and then we do analysis on even redesigning your packaging, including post-consumer recycled material into it, using less packaging, simply where can you cut packaging, and then also where it makes environmental sense, shifting to alternative packaging, right? So can you shift your entire PET portfolio to glass, for example, right? Spoiler alert, your greenhouse gas emissions will skyrocket, but your plastic waste environmental impact will be improved. So we really try to work with companies for them to better understand their portfolio, and then to put in place strategies to improve that over time. And then downstream, we work on our Rethinking Recycling initiatives. So this is really about working with municipalities to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of their waste management processes. So we do a lot of consumer behavior work. We have engaged with millions of consumers in Indonesia and in Argentina to educate them on what can be recycled, how to source separate, what days collection happens, and we found through our research that we can cut the cost of sorting by 80% if we're really efficient and effective at changing the behavior of consumers. And then we put in place some technological innovations as well. We have a chatbot in Indonesia that consumers and citizens can put questions into, asking what is recyclable, how can they further engage in waste management. We work a lot with waste pickers and cooperatives to link them to buyers of their materials. And then we also have put in place an operations platform for government in Indonesia to use to better track the materials that are coming into their facilities, trace them throughout, and then see where those go at the end of life.
Amazing.
So we think recycling deserves a chance. There is just a lot of work that needs to be done upstream in order to feed the right materials into the right type of a waste management system.
Yeah, that makes sense. Again, as you said, having that full picture in terms of what the costs could be in terms of environmental and economic costs and the impact there is absolutely vital. And providing these alternative kind of approaches and looking at what kind of, what is actually the cost of an alternative material. And those are the kind of things that could be really helpful for the industry. Ignacio, as well, in terms of, you mentioned earlier the design principles that you have developed at the Consumer Goods Forum. In terms of the role of recycling and the latest technologies that you have seen in terms of mechanical and chemical recycling, what role could they play? And do you see, how do you see these technologies? How could they be integrated? And we have heard that there's limitations, but how could they play a role?
So I think, a lot has been said in here, with which I agree. I'm going to build a little bit on Laszlo's point. I think over the past 3 years, I had a subset of members, 40 of them, looking into recycling only. So obviously, mechanical remains the priority. It's a cleaner process. It's mechanical. It's not chemical, right? So everybody wants to favor mechanical as much as possible. New technologies are emerging within mechanical. But what do we do with 800,000 tons of flexible material in Europe? That comes just from the membership that we have. One of the only things you can do is pyrolysis, which is chemical recycling. The moment you put the word chemical, you make things unsexy, right? Fine. But how do we demystify a little bit chemical recycling? So there's a paper that you can download from the webpage called Vision and Principles on Optimal Chemical Recycling, where we study the life cycle assessment, where we look at these possibilities. Obviously means more industry, but if we do it right, meaning with the right framework on health and safety, environmental, complementarity, of course, with mechanical, it could work. And it's the only way, as of today, for many companies to reach their commitments.
Yeah.
So they're going to miss the commitments 25. Let's look at 30. One of the few ways they have with flexibles for food contact application, it'll be chemical recycling, unless they switch everything to other materials or make it rigid. So that's the reflection we had over the past few years.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Ignacio, for highlighting that. And you mentioned something important, which is that complementarity. It's almost like, there isn't this silver bullet. It's not that this one technology is going to solve everything. But we also did a study on these kind of different technologies, and they all have their advantages and disadvantages. It's not like there's this one that shines through. But there is a role for it. But we have said that, redesigning the systems approach and the reduction is important. I wanted to open the floor as well for any questions here in the audience. There are a couple of questions here in the first row.
Hi, James Merchant from Marine Conservation Society. There's a question about forever chemicals in the recycling stream. Is there anything that can be done to remove them, or do we need much stronger regulations to prevent them in the first place?
Forever chemicals. Who would like to comment on?
I'm not sure I heard the beginning of the question. Sorry, if you may repeat.
To remove them. About forever chemicals in recycling streams, and whether you can do anything to remove them, or whether you need much stronger regulations to prevent them in the first place.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
I can maybe give an example, and then Laszlo maybe you could. We talked about simplicity here, making things more simple. And it is true that right now, so far, with the combination of type of packaging and type of material we have, that diversity doesn't allow every stream to have a solution. So yes, we do have to simplify. We have to suppress some materials and some combinations. And this is why we need a global picture to see, okay, for this specific application, where is going to be the right flow, or where we have enough volume to make it worth having a recycling stream, and if not, we need to be bold enough to suppress it. And this is happening on some types of plastics. This can be, for instance, PVC, which is tend to be obviously reduced and suppressed, but also expanded polystyrene, for instance. So this cannot be done by one actor on its own. This is important to do it collectively, because when you ask one supplier to change his own system, changing the type of material, I'm talking from a retailer's perspective, changing his old plans to adapt, It's much easier if you do it by having a common ask from all the markets saying, okay, we as retailer are going to suppress that type of solution at one point, and you need to be ready by that time. And we can discuss what is the right time frame and how this can be done. But we need to, obviously, as a retailer, we can't take decision for our own suppliers. They're responsible for what they're going to, with the reps, EPR system, sorry, in English, they are responsible for what's going to happen after. But we can give clarity on what we see in the market, and we see reduced amount of material that will have efficient system for recycling, and there is materials that will have to go.
Yes.
Just to add on, I think that it starts with greater transparency. I think that there is a lack of transparency into the types of chemicals that go into our plastics products. And I think, I know that the UN Plastics Treaty that's being discussed and is going to continue discussions next month in Paris, one of the objectives of that is to start to eliminate environmentally unsafe chemicals from plastics products. But right now, it's a little bit unclear as to what chemicals go into each one of these plastics types. And so I think getting better transparency from plastics producers, maybe that starts with more legislation, is a very good first step into addressing that.
Yeah, transparency.
Just one comment on that. Of course, additives and fillers cannot be removed via mechanical recycling. So this is one of the limitations of this process. So it's important to know what's exactly inside, and if we know, okay, this is something hazardous, then you don't use it for a second life. And this is one of the most important things also for the brand owners and retailers, that they know exactly what kind of recyclates they are using. So the traceability of the material. And this is not always that transparent like we would.
Yes, traceability, transparency, those are key terms, but also the progress that we've seen in the plastics treaty on, at the sidelines of that agreement, as we heard earlier from Ambassador Thompson, there's also this council that will now look at chemicals as well, hopefully also starting to tackle forever chemicals. Any additional question? I know there are a couple more people raised their hands. There's someone in the back, and right here as well. Yeah.
So Josh Palfreman, I work with the World Bank and on the UN Plastics Treaty with UNEP in Nairobi, but I also run an RPET company in South Africa. So what I find interesting about the discourse today on stage is that there's a strong inclination that we're all on the same boat and we just haven't gotten there yet. It's just a matter of fact. We'll eventually get to a place where chemical and mechanical recycling will work. For me, it's more an issue of trust. So I find that, how do you police your members at the Consumer Goods Forum is a question I had for you, Ignacio, because several of them are also on the Minderoo Foundation's Plastic Makers Index. Several of them are being sued by Klein Earth for false advertising, including by indiscriminately placing a recyclable logo on single-use plastic products that are impossible to recycle economically. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's a big trust issue. It's not, there's a real vetted interest, which I think is hindering the advancement of recycling. And that's a challenge that I haven't seen spoken about yet.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ignacio, would like to respond?
Okay. No, sure. There are two things in here when it comes to recycling. One is ambition, the other one is economics. So it's far cheaper to buy virgin material than to recycle it. So that has been limiting member companies a lot. The very purpose of the Consumer Goods Forum, created in the 1950s, was to get them together to create peer pressure to advance this sort of agenda. Same thing with human rights, same thing with deforestation, health and wellness. Progress is slow, yes. Individually, these companies are doing good stuff, yes, but it's a drop in the ocean, right? So by creating collective action, I think we're slowly getting there. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation, Minderoo, all of that. So you have very big companies trying to negotiate with suppliers in their supply chain how to change that paradigm. And that's, I think, what they find resistance. One of the main issues that I found is when they go back in the value chain, they're not the majority of some of the suppliers. So basically, I'll give you an example. PET. Let's move all the PET from pigmented to transparent. So if you take Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Nestle, Danone, those are the big bottlers. But when they go to the supplier, they say, "Oh no, sorry, it's a different tooling. I'm going to charge you a fortune," because the rest don't want to do it. So that's when we start breaking silos, and we start, the economics begin to work. When all get together, and they say to the suppliers, it's either transparent PET or you have no business because I can go elsewhere. That's when we started seeing it. The same with deforestation in Indonesia or in Brazil. That's when you get the collective action.
Yeah.
So progress is slow, but I think by having them together with a common purpose, at least we're getting to a point where there's more transparency, and I'm happy, put them, you put members on the spot. I call them members, but companies. Put companies on the spot. There's more transparency, more traceability on everything: nutrition, plastics, deforestation. Companies need to react, need to listen to the consumer. The consumer is another very important angle. So they need to improve on all of those things. It's just slow.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Unless there's a very quick question. Did anyone have the microphone? Otherwise,
There's one there.
Oh, okay. Just a very quick question.
Yes, I have a very quick one. Please, my name is Luke Dugsium. I would suggest, and I'd like you to then argue against me, of recycling is basically a siren call, leading us to disaster. Recycling was created by the plastics industry to have us all to buy more virgin plastics. And it's going remarkably well, is it not? So is recycling just worse than a dead end? Is it disastrous?
Who would like to take that one up?
I'd like to bounce on it. I think if we focus only on recycling, I would agree that we will keep status quo, and this we don't want. If we only focus on recycling, we send a message that it's okay, we can continue, and it's not the case. We are entering a world with more constraint, and more constraint for recycling. So we need to take this into account when we design solutions so that they are efficient, low-tech, they can be implemented everywhere, but also more constraint for our businesses, for consumers, everybody. But let me give you an example. When we started suppressing single-use packaging for cashier, when you go out of the store, it was difficult. But now you go in a Carrefour store, whether a hypermarket or supermarket, the very vast majority of our clients come with a bag. It is a constraint to come back with your bag, but it is very obvious for everybody that this is the right thing to do now, and there's no coming back. This is the kind of model we have to have in mind. There's going to be a big shift coming. We need to think in that way. How our store are going to look like in 10 years? They will look definitely different. This is the type of thing we need to implement to make sure that recycling then is not leading us to disaster, but on the contrary, it's part of the solution.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I would like to thank the panel for their great contributions. Obviously, we've heard about the limitations of chemical and mechanical recycling, although there is a place for it. As we said, there is the whole value chain that we need to look at. Of course, the collection, sorting, recycling is part of it, but creating that market is absolutely vital. There is a consensus, which means there's a basis for action. There's almost a mandate for action, but progress has been slow. I think there's been consensus on that one as well. And of course, if there's supplier agreements and if there's partnerships that coming together, working on solutions together, there can actually be progress. Thank you very much again to the panel, and thanks for your questions. Thank you. So.